I wanted to show two interactions on CNN recently that kind of threw me for a loop, because it almost felt like either a denial of reality or just like it just feels like people don't know how to interact with the press or interact with questions that are slightly challenging. And we'll start with the easier one before going into the one that's even more infuriating. And this is GOP Representative, man, I'm really bad with her name, Militakis. We'll just call her Malio. Representative Malio was complaining about Senator Schumer and President Biden not giving them anything on immigration reform. And so the host was like, well, what about the bipartisan border deal that was negotiated by Senator Langford and Chris Murphy? They didn't bring up Senator Langford and Murphy specifically, but you know, what about that deal? Well, they did give something. What about that? And she just said, nope. Check this out.
That's wrong. So even getting an agreement to reverse
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just want to push the point there, though. But it is all happening. But at this moment in time, the time is of the essence on the funding for these aid bills. And this stuff has not gotten worked out in months.
Yeah, but that is why I'm making the case that, you know, Senator Schumer and the president should be giving a little. They see what's happening to our country. Do they not see the drug cartels profiting billions of dollars by human trafficking and drug trafficking? Do they not see 100,000 Americans dying from fentanyl that's coming over our border? Why will they not work with us?
Well, they did try to pass
they did not, actually.
Well, because the former president told them to kill it. So I'm just saying it was negotiated by James Langford,
first of all,
and Kirsten Sinema and Chris Murphy. It was a bipartisan piece of legislation.
Why are they so desperate to rewrite this history? Senator Langford himself admits that's a senior Republican that was involved in negotiations, a conservative senator from Utah. He's not from fucking Libtardistan, okay? He's from Utah. He said in an interview on Fox recently, saying that Trump told him to kill it because of the campaign season, that they didn't want to have any victories on the border right now because then maybe Biden could claim them. And so it was the choice of politics over trying to deal with the issues that you see. So, I mean, it would have passed, it would have gone through if Trump would have gave it the okay. Trump said no, and so it wasn't passed. If Trump gave it the okay, there's a good chance that this GOP representative would have voted for it. The Senate was happy with it. The Republicans were going to get concessions that now they're not going to get. They would have gotten concessions. And after the election, if Democrats have the Senate and Democrats have the House, or even if Republicans have the Senate and the House, it's still going to be an issue. You're going to have to find some compromise unless they want to destroy the filibuster in the Senate. They're going to lose the opportunity. They already lost the opportunity, but they're not going to get the compromises that Biden put forward. And they did it for very few compromises on the Democrat side. The Democrats have been asking for a deal on the Dreamers forever. There was no deal on the Dreamers on this immigration plan, even though that has been the number one, if not one of the top Democratic demands on the issue of immigration for like forever, ever since I've been interested in politics. And that wasn't even in there. It was a few pithy concessions. It was generally giving Republicans the lion's share of what they wanted. And even when that was sunk by Donald Trump, then the Ukraine aid, after it was separated from it again, after there was this big hubbub of if we pass out of Ukraine aid, it must be attached to immigration. We need to take separate issues and combine them, but also divide the issues. And I don't like it when we bundle everything, but never mind, bundle everything. Fucking incoherent. But then we added a fentanyl sweetener. It was legislation added to the Ukraine aid that made it so that you'd get Ukraine aid and you'd get more funding for scanners on the southern border.
Trajan a tier 1 subscription.
Hey, Aries, thank you so much for giving Trajan a tier 1 sub and getting rid of one more white name. I don't think we have any more white names in site chat. I think you just got rid of the last one. Is the purge complete? Did we really successfully purge them? Congratulations. But we added a fentanyl sweetener. And that sounds like we gave them fentanyl. We didn't give the Republicans fentanyl in return for Ukraine aid. No, what it was is there was going to be scanners put on the southern border at border crossings to more investment to look for fentanyl to stop it from crossing over the southern border. So even after everything sunk, the Democrats are still trying to add things to Ukraine aid to satisfy Republicans after they sank it and said, no deal. By the way, I agree with the fentanyl sweetener, by the way. And they still put it on the table, said screw it for 6 months, and now we're going to pass it, a separate bill with no sweetener as far as I'm aware. And it's a bill made by the Republican House Speaker after 6 months of delay, really no different than the previous Ukraine legislation, meaning we've delayed this for no reason, grandstanded on how it needed to be tied to immigration, and now we're passing it without it being tied to immigration, after Donald Trump said no reform on immigration. And that's the walkaway this GOP House member takes away. I don't know. Feels a little disingenuous to me. But this interaction right here, oh boy, this interaction from Congresswoman Luna, which, I mean, honestly, everything I see from Congresswoman Luna suggests to me that she might need to start being considered amongst, you know, the Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert knuckle dragging crowd. Because to me, this interview shows clearly that the biggest opponents to Ukraine aid, as Marjorie Taylor Greene is talking about the sacrifice of children, organ harvesting to fund the war effort, as others are talking about the horrific oppression of Christians in Ukraine, while ignoring evangelicals literally being killed by the Russian army in occupied territory, whether it's the Russian Orthodox Army and the crimes over the years before the big invasion, or it was a takeover of Christian churches and building military bases on it, or the killing of priests since the big war has started. Multiple priests have been murdered.
Subscription. Dealing with stragglers.
Hey, we found a straggler. Thank you for a tier 1 sub to Soyanide, but I also see Sky Cinnamon, but you don't need to worry about it. Sky Cinnamon can just always, you know, he can just always stay in the gutter, I guess, poor and desolate, without shoes and socks, completely subless. But I mean, you can do that, of course. I'm not going to judge you at all. Just a lot. Anyway, where were we? But I really think that we should start considering Luna with these types of crazies. Because she is trying to oppose this aid to Ukraine. She's standing against it. She's going out there and she starts critiquing Ukraine, saying Ukraine made some bad choices. And it's evident immediately that this opponent of Ukraine aid, just like most of the highest profile opponents of Ukraine aid, don't really know anything about the country's history. She claims that it was Ukraine who chose not to join NATO. Listen to this.
Tell you is currently right now with the Ukraine, while we are sending money over there, there's no accountability. But I think even furthermore, remember, Ukraine chose to not join NATO. They also, in addition to that, had decisions that they made early on that would basically enable them to support what we're doing here in the United States as far as fighting that, and they chose not to. So again, it is not our fight to fight. We've given them a ton of aid. We've given them so much aid that we could have funded a second Marine Corps. I think that if you go into what's happening right now with the inflation that we're seeing in this country, in addition to, you know, let's take student loans, for example, and yet we're funding a foreign government, I simply don't agree with that.
Look, it was NATO and the United States and others who didn't want Ukraine to enter back when it was an issue initially.
I'm going to have to respectfully push back on that because I disagree, but continue, sorry.
You know what, I appreciate that very much.
Is she brain dead? How did she come up with this? Where did she get this from? I don't even know what type of Vatnik hole in the ground she's going to drag this Vactoid out of. I don't know of any historian, of any, even Russian propagandist, where the Ukrainians were in a position where they could have joined NATO and they simply chose not to. I honestly, the reporter pushes back, but if I was the reporter, or I was the reporter's boss, I would want a lot more. I would want more. I would want to be like, okay, so when was that decision made? When did they decide not to join NATO? Who was the president? When did this happen? How did it happen? Can you tell me what year? Could you just tell me the basics about that decision-making process and why they came to that decision and how they came to that decision, or just any evidence that came to that decision? Just a year. Just tell me a year it happened. How about that? You know what? Not even a year. Tell me the decade. Tell me the decade it happened. When did they decide that? Why did they decide that? How did they decide that?
RS385 has donated $5. Didn't her opponent in her primary try to hire a hitman to kill her? She's a window licker for sure.
Oh, I think at one point, yes, I remember the story. Man, but now we've learned that a hitman can do nothing to kill this woman. Because if she would have gotten shot in the head, it would have been just like, whew, there would be nothing to hit. She would have been fine. If anything, I'd say she's the perfect politician, assassination proof. But I mean, how do you come to this conclusion? I mean, this is like, I don't even like. This is like Poland chose to be invaded, or Poland encouraged. It's like such a basic, like just such a basic wrong, just so wrong from head to bottom. So I'll throw out the history out there. In 2008, Ukraine started to talk about seriously joining NATO, and Ukraine before that was already doing different types of NATO integration. Part of the reason why you were seeing Ukrainian troops in Iraq and 18 died in Iraq was because they wanted to buddy up with the United States, who was the predominant power on the world stage in the Cold War period, in the post-Cold War period. Ukraine was very interested in NATO membership. There were some presidents that were less interested, but they never broke off relations because they still wanted to benefit from a good relationship with NATO. And a lot of them wanted to join NATO and pursued joining NATO. But whether the Ukrainian perspective and some leadership disagreed, some agreed with it, it was always the consistent position of NATO that, okay, I mean, even if one day you join, you can't join now. That was the case in 2008 for not only integration reasons, because they were not on NATO standard ammunition, but also a bunch of other statecraft reasons. But most importantly, a fear of provoking the Russians. And when you join NATO, you need to not only just have the approval of the United States, you need to have the approval of every single NATO member state. Like, for example, remember when Finland and Sweden wanted to join and they had to wait so long because Turkey and Hungary wanted to see how much they could strong arm out of them? Turkey on the issue of Kurds and the Kurdish diaspora, Hungary on the issue of gimme, right? Like this is because they had to please every single member. And the Germans were against NATO membership for the Ukrainians. The French were against it. Basically, I know the Hungarians were certainly against it. We don't have any indication to make us believe that the Turks were in favor of it. So even if you could have convinced the United States at the time, which was, I think, still against it under the Obama administration, who was trying to advance the big reset policy with the Russians, like reset of relations. They had the whole reset button and everything that Hillary and Sergei Lavrov pushed. There's no point here where the Ukrainians are like, never mind, we had an opportunity to join NATO. No, there was never an opportunity for Ukraine to join NATO. They did not choose not to join NATO. They were never allowed to join NATO in the first place. So there wasn't a choice about them even joining NATO because they didn't have the opportunity. And when they did pursue it, they were told maybe later. So this to me shows that she doesn't know the basics. If I was to ask her, like, what are the Heavenly 100? If I was to ask her, what happened on Maidan Square with the snipers? If I was to ask her, who's Yanukovych? Or, let's go back. Who's Lukashenko? Ooh, let's go further back. Wait. How about the Orange Revolution? How about, when they annexed Crimea, what happened? How did it happen? Like, what information does she have about this war? Because when you listen to her talk, it sounds as if she's like taking the files out of her mind, looking for the words, trying to remember the talking points. It doesn't even sound like she really knows what she's saying. And then she says she respectfully disagrees about a basic fact. It's like she disagrees that NATO didn't want them in. That's the thing that really gets me, is the reporter didn't even say you're wrong about NATO, Ukraine choosing not to join, which he could have said. He instead said, what about, the United States and NATO didn't want them to join. And she said no, indicating that she thinks that all of NATO, all the NATO states, Hungary, Turkey, France, Germany, they all came together and agreed, and America agreed, and Ukraine was just like, no, I don't want to join. I don't like the color blue. Like what? Listen how she frames it. Let's do it one more time, okay? I'm just particularly perplexed at this woman and the fact that she was able to get elected.
Marine Corps. I think that if you go to what's happening right now with the inflation that we're seeing in this country, in addition to, let's take student loans, for example, and yet we're funding a foreign government, I simply don't agree with that.
Look, it was NATO and the United States and others who didn't want Ukraine to enter back when it was an issue initially.
I'm going to have to respectfully push back on that because I disagree, but.
Well, America declared independence in 1776. I respectfully disagree. Well, World War II ended in 1945. I respectfully disagree. Well, the Korean War ended in 19... No. I respectfully disagree.
RS385 gave Sky Kinnaman a Tier 1 subscription.
Thank you for the Tier 1 sub. If you got an R next to your name, vote up. That seems to be the process now. Thank you for giving a Tier 1 sub to Sky Cinnamon. I appreciate that. Also, putting aside the fact that she knows nothing about Ukraine, I don't know, maybe she just needs to go sit down and watch the Timothy Snyder Yale lectures. We're gonna be watching that confrontation between Timothy Snyder and Marjorie Taylor Greene next. But quickly on the other point about spending money and, we have student debt, so why should we be funding a foreign government? We spend 1% of our budget on foreign aid. 1%. The reason we have massive debt, or the reason we have a deficit, or the reason we have these economic issues are not because we support our allies with foreign aid. Certainly when much of that foreign aid is also hand-me-down equipment and also going to be used to replace the hand-me-down equipment that with newer equipment made by American defense companies in the United States. So when you say all this money is going to a foreign government, well, most of it's being spent in the United States. It's not going to a foreign government. And the money that is going to the foreign government isn't even going to them to be theirs forever. It's a loan now. So you're against the idea of a loan when you're talking about the actual money that's going there? So we're not giving them the money. We're saying, here's the money for now. You're going to give it to us back later. Knowing that later they're going to be economically distraught after the fact, but still, Trump wanted to make sure it was a loan so he could make sure he was pinching every penny with the country having its people dumped in mass graves. But I just want to throw out there, I could sit here and argue, hey, this is why, I think it's less expensive for us to send aid to Ukraine than have to deploy more troops in Europe depending on Russian victory in Ukraine and coming closer to NATO, or I'd rather send them munitions than have to send our boys over there. But putting all that aside, she supports aid to Israel. You cannot go on TV and say, oh no, we can't spend money on foreign country. They're a foreign country. We got issue at home. All of money should be spent at home. Let's ignore the rest of the world. Let's ignore our allies. Let's ignore the largest war in Europe since World War II, which will be a definitive war for the rest of the 21st century. Let's ignore it. That's cost too much. Oh, Israel, a country we've been giving lots of aid to for the last multiple decades, now wants more aid money? No, that's fine. That's okay. Oh, and they have no idea of a political solution. So this could be in perpetuity. Okay, whatever, 20 billion. 20 billion. Oh, they have a nuclear arsenal. They have an own standing army. They wouldn't need American aid to necessarily sustain. Well, just here you go. Hypocrite.